Hello, I am Danny the Teach, and this is Beauty Manifested. I am here with Granny L today, and we're going to be talking about patience, gratitude, and appreciating people. So let's hear what Granny L has to say about that.
I think when I think of patience, I've frequently been told by some people it is something that I overdo because my attitude about it has always been whatever there is that you have talked about doing or promised to do or try to do, uh, you leave it alone, and when you get around to it, it's going to be there. And the harder you try to do it, unless your heart is in it, it's very hard to do. But when your heart is in it, it comes very easily, and the people around you will either be glad you did it or think that you're after something. And in my case, most of the time, my patience is something that I'm after, but it's not something for another person, but it's something that I'm after for me. And a lot of times, people think that the two things don't go together because you're talking about me, and unless you really put your heart into doing something and know that you're at the end of it, I don't think it works out well. And that is something that I kind of learned from my mother. My mother was the most patient person in the whole world. As the mother of 15, hers, his, and theirs. That was that when she married my father, he already had 9 kids, his wife having died in childbirth. She had 3 kids, and together they had 3 kids. So that's his, hers, and theirs. And my mother never referred to stepchildren. I was almost an adult before I understood the concept of step. I still think it's not a good term. But stepchildren refer to another person's, your mate, where you're the second mate that this person has had, where they bring children with them. And my mother always referred to her 9 children, or his 9 children, as her children. And in that case where he brought 9 children with him from a wife who died in childbirth, I think it was one of the first times when I think I thought my mother was ugly, because one of the neighbors happened to tell me that my mother was the stepmother or something like that. And I ran home and told Mama. And I thought, as I said, it was the only time I ever saw my mother angry, because she never referred to them as her stepchildren. She thought all 15 children were hers, and they were. The ones that she brought to Mr. Dave, her husband, my father, she was the only mother that they ever knew. And in that scenario, you kind of learn the feeling of patience. And my mother was patient. She was always the picture of patience. My mother there was a program that used to be, that was called wait till your father gets home. And if anything had happened during the day, Mama would always say, wait till your father gets home. And that meant that if there were any punishment to be given, Papa would give it. And Papa was I guess the authoritarian or the policeman or whatever it was, but Papa was the one with whom you had to deal in order to do anything. How to say grand? We have in this family, I have 3 grandchildren, 3 great-grandchildren. And one of the things as I look at my 3 grandchildren, or even my 3 great-grandchildren, I wonder how anybody who is raised in the same household could be so different, because frequently people use the expression someone was cut from the same bolt of cloth, which is true of children. You are cut from the same bolt of cloth, your mother, your father. But they could be so different as night is from day. The twins, that's my granddaughter's children. One is like night and the other is like day. And when they talk to you, you would never know that they were in the same household until it is something that has to be done, that has to do with their family. And then all of a sudden, it's like you're talking to, you understand what is meant by the idea of uniform. And I think if people were to ever, I guess, as I think of going to Catholic school or any parochial school or any kind of private school, one of the things that you find at some of these schools, not all of them, but some of them, there is a true idea of uniform. And I always look at the military. In the military, when you talk about uniforms, you know without ever having seen a person, if somebody talks about sailors, Marines, merchant Marines, Army, you know immediately without ever having seen any of these people, you know what their uniform's going to be like because they wear uniforms. I went to parochial schools, and it didn't matter whether you were black, white, grizzly, or gray. That's something my mother used to say. You didn't have to worry about your friend looking better than you did. Now, maybe your friend looked better because they carried themselves differently, and that has a lot to do with it. But your uniform, nobody ever had anything that looked better than yours because we wore the same shoes, we wore the same socks, we wore the same dress, and we wore it at the same time. The winter uniform was navy blue and white, collars and cuffs. And the collars were identical. there wasn't somebody who had a nice, frilly little pretty collar that had all the doodads. You had a collar that was cut round and ironed stiff, and that was it. And you had no choice. Your socks were identical. You didn't have what they call sweet socks, and somebody else had raggedy socks. You did not have cool shoes. You had the same. It was a uniform. Uni meaning one. And I get back to the idea of when they talk about Catholic schools, I get back to the idea that I can remember almost to the day that God was invited out of the classrooms in public schools, because I think the lady's name was Madeline Mac something or other, but it'll come to me. But she came up when she went to one of these big meetings or one of the state meetings, but God didn't have any business in a public school. And almost to the second, I can remember when God was invited out, because a lot of the acrimony that went into the schools started the day that God was invited out of the classroom. You couldn't have a flag. You couldn't say a prayer. You couldn't do anything. And I think that was the day I realized that I was truly free, because my husband had told me I did not have to do anything that I felt was anathema to what I believed from anybody but him. And I had a little flag that I set on my desk because I believed that as an American, I was entitled to this. I believed that God had a place in that classroom. And I believed that I could ask questions, particularly like, now I couldn't have done this in a Catholic school, because in the Catholic school you really do have to do what their rules are. But I could do this in a public school because the taxpayers paid for uniformity. And it was the best thing in the world, because when that happened and someone says, why is that flag on your desk? I said, what do you mean, why is that flag on my desk? That flag's on my desk because this is America. I've got Middle Eastern kids in this class. I have Hispanic kids in this class. I have Catholic kids in this class. And I'm teaching them under this flag. Give me your tired, hungry, huddled masses longing to be free. And I'm going to say, you can't say something about your flag. You can't say something about your country. It's all about, that's a crock. And of course, that's not very nice to say. But it's something that unifies people about things in which they believe. Give me your tired, hungry, huddled masses. And I believe that there are many days when that lady standing in our harbor feels really, really bad and wants to lay down and cry, because I didn't ask Mr. Teej if I could or could not say something, but I can remember one of the problems of June the 6th, I think it was June the 6th, when the former president actually, it's so awful what he said. I don't think I could repeat it, but it was a day when I think that America, under his aegis, was made to look really bad because the lady in the harbor really could not say, "Give me your tired, you're hungry, huddle masses," because he said that they were not welcome. That's not nice. Now, does that sound like an old lady when you say something not nice? But it wasn't. Mr. T. Jameson. And to the audience, I'm sorry. But I do believe that we're going to have a time once again when America was all that she was supposed to do. Again, having grown up in the segregated South, where I don't, it's hard for me to explain this, because, and this was something that my husband and I used to have words of, and that was, again, you're tired, hungry, huddle masses. And that man came over in the boat, and it's hard right now to believe that there are places where they still don't want to say that the people who were here when that boat came into the harbor, where when Columbus came into the harbor, it was almost winter time. The people who were here, those are the Native Americans. They were called Indians. And even today, they are not treated properly. We are still fighting for people who are coming from other countries, which is fine because the lady in the harbor says, "Give me your tired, you're hungry, huddle masses." And you're going to eliminate the person who was here, who helped them through the hardest winter that they ever had, who taught them to fish, who taught them to hunt, who taught them everything that they knew about existing on a foreign soil in which they were longing to be free, while at the same time the Native Americans were not given the same privilege. And we still have the blacks, the reds, the browns, not having the things for which they've been fighting. Some of these same black, brown, red people being sent to foreign soil to fight the people on foreign soil. Mr. Teach, where are we fighting right now? It'll come to me. But right now they're sending all of the American soldiers. Where are we going to war right now? It'll come to you too. But anyhow, patients, these people who are here welcoming the black, the brown, the red, but not being given the same privileges. There's something wrong with all the mean things that we as Americans do. And I say we, because as long as there are people here who go along with the programs that allow this, there's something wrong. There's something wrong where a voice could be used and it is not. And I don't know where I heard it, but one of the things I have heard that is true, and that is silence is consent. And when you don't use a voice to stop and correct someone who is doing something wrong, in essence, you are giving that person permission. It says, it's okay, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to get involved. And as long as you don't get involved, it may seem as though you're a good guy, but you're not. Because you have a voice, and if a lot of voices are right out there with you, and you don't get them to join your voice, or you're in a position where you could change their voice and you don't, you're no different than the person who is fostering this kind of thing. And that lady in the harbor, I think sometimes that she may cry a little bit because we still aren't where we ought to be. And we see all of the bad things that they're saying and about Mr. Biden. Mr. Biden inherited a hornet's nest 2 years ago. And he is being blamed for all of the stuff that's happened since that previous person was here. And I can't even use the previous person's name because it makes me ill. It does. But one of the things, one day I'm gonna maybe jump out of this chair and go down to the park, because back during the Vietnamese crisis, the Vietnamese War, I was young enough to be one of the students who marched at that time. I would like to march today, and I'll just take my chair, and it kind of gets around a little bit. And I think some of the people in the neighborhood wish that I would not do it. But the people in the neighborhood, now that's another thing. These are the nicest neighbors I have ever seen. And if you raise your voice about some things, take it to the council, fix the sidewalks, fix it so that the old people can walk down the street, or the young people, and they can get around without stumbling. I see that there are a lot of places where they're doing this, and they're doing it because somebody has spoken to someone and made them know that that old person, that little person, that person who is physically compromised, that person could be you. One day you find out, and you might get an understanding of when I walk in another man's moccasin and another woman's moccasins too. I'll understand what it means, and it does make a difference. I remember when I first got this chair, it was very difficult for me to admit that I needed it. But then it hit me. Suppose you didn't have it. Then what would you do? Would you crawl under the bed? Even then, you I couldn't even crawl. And I asked myself, today, the therapist wants me to do A, B, and C. And I thought to myself, today, I am going to walk in another man's moccasins. And it took me 2 hours to get out one sock. But I eventually got it on. And I stopped belly aching about it and went on and did what I could do the best. And so rather than talk about what you can't do what you can. And one of the things you can do, use that voice that you've got so that the lady in the harbor isn't doing everything by herself. There are many things that right in your backyard needs doing. Be a good neighbor.
Be a good neighbor. Wait, I think that's someone else's logo. Not logo. Their tagline.
Oh, and of course, because most people have come from roots. Your mother taught you to be a good neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Your teacher teaches you to be a good neighbor. Your minister teaches you to be a good neighbor. As a matter of fact, someplace in the Bible, it talks about being a good neighbor. And it doesn't really cost anything to be a good neighbor. You be a good neighbor by saying, good morning, buenos dias, ¿cómo está? As the kids say, what up, doe? That's a greeting. It doesn't mean you're a thug, because that's the way friends talk to each other. What up, doe? I got one of the biggest problems that I had one day, and this was as an adult, was someone said, if you saw God and someone asked you, how would you speak to God? I said, well, do you really want to know? Well, yeah, of course we want to know. Okay. I would say, because he's my friend, yo, dog, what up? And you would have thought that I had poured the contents of a bedpan on their head, because this wasn't what you ask, what would I say to my friend? And very frequently, when you speak to your friend, when you hear the young people talking to their friend, yo, dog, what up? No. I tell my students, or I told my students, you can't hold a job when you do that. So you pick the places where you say it. But if you've ever seen, there's a picture that they have of God that I know I've got a picture of it in one of my Bibles someplace. But his head is all back, and he's got that look that says, yo, dog, what up? And I really do think he would say that. But not everybody thinks that. But that's the kind of society in which we live. We've got different greetings, different meanings for the same thing, for different people. But you should have words for your friends and neighbors that, even though they're different words, the way you do them is different. And again, something else. One day I said, I frequently, when I drop things, and I've done this for a long time, I say, oh, sugar. And one of my great-granddaughter said to me one day, Gigi, can I say that? And I looked at her and I said, well, why couldn't you say it? She said, Well, it sounds kind of like something that my mother has told me not to say. And I thought to myself, now this is coming from a 4-year-old. And the whole reason I said it, that I said it from the very beginning, was to get a reaction from high school students. And I always get the same reaction from old people, young people, because it does sound, it has the same effect as if you were saying, oh, sugar. Doesn't that sound the same way? Does it give you the same kind of relief? And at the same time, I could teach her another word. And I said, now, since I've got you on this page, I'll teach you another word, inflection. And I know your mother has said this to you. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And you can say a lot of things to a lot of people many times. And you can tell from the way they walk away from you or talk back to you or respond that they have interpreted it differently. Many times it is interpreted differently than you intended for them to do it. But it was interpreted differently because of the inflection that was used when you delivered it. Therein lies another tale.
Okay, Grandma, do you have any last notes on gratitude, patience, and appreciating people?
I think I've said it all. It's not what you do, it's how you do it, when you do it, where you do it.
Yes. Well, thank you. I hope everyone has a beautiful day. Stay beautiful. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe, leave us a comment about maybe what you want us to talk about in the future, and stay beautiful.
Thank you for listening.